Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. What is possibly the final pick'ems and picks for the Overwatch League today. I'm going to be doing my bracket for the 2023 playoffs. The pick'ems don't include the third place match for whatever reason. I don't really know why, but we'll have the pick'ems for the playoffs here. And it's going to be an interesting one, obviously. Meta has changed going into the playoffs. You know, it's going to be a pretty heavy Zarya meta. Teams have been making changes throughout the year. Or not throughout the year. Throughout the past couple of weeks, kind of moving in. Florida adding Who Are You? Houston adding Bernard. So there's been some moves. I know there's some rumors about Hangzhou potentially bringing in Ligue, but I haven't seen anything about that. That has not been officially kind of shown. And the picture of them at the airport did not have Ligue in it, so I don't think they're making a move there. So it will be interesting to see what happens in this one, but we're going to jump in and we're going to do the brackets. I think I'm just going to start by going and doing the West, this top bracket first, and then we'll do the bottom bracket, and then we'll do the top four there. So here at the top, we have the bracket which has the Hangzhou Spark, Atlanta Reign, Boston Uprising, and London Spitfire. The seating is awful and makes no sense, but that is what it is. You can see, as you kind of look at this bracket, it's a very interesting group of teams, because none of them really stand out to me as teams that are going to love Zarya in the meta. London, of course, Hottie Reinhardt show, that's what they like to run. Boston look better with Smurf in usually, though Kalios is a very solid Zarya player. It's arguably his best hero. You know, you look at some of his stats on Zarya, he's pretty good. I think it's where he's the most comfortable. I mean, he's top 5 in hero damage per 10 on Zarya all time. And he's got some okay elimination to final blow stats. So if it is a Zarya meta, you feel at least like Kalios will be the most comfortable as a damage or as a tank player in this meta than he has been in any other meta. Though you can probably also just play Smurf on Zarya, if I'm being honest with you, because stats-wise, he has more final blows per 10 than Kalios does. He has more hero damage per 10 than Kalios does. He has more eliminations per 10. So I think they probably will just stick with Smurf. His stats on Zarya are better than Kalios. Now, how much of that is based on just the rosters that they've been around and stuff like that is unsure. But I think we'll probably still see Smurf, and he'll probably play Zarya. Atlanta, I don't really think Hawk is a great Zarya. His statistics on Zarya are pretty poor. And of course, the Hangzhou Spark. I don't know, like I said, if they're making a move. But if they aren't, I don't think Gushui is going to play Zarya. It's not a hero he has any real history playing. And of course, I don't have 20 anymore, so you don't really have a lot of options there in that regard. Now, I think, to start with this first game between Hangzhou and Atlanta, I think Atlanta can do one of two things in this game. They can commit to the Hawk Zarya, and they can see how well they can get away with running it. The other thing is, if Zarya is a good pick, generally speaking, you can get away with Winston. Winston is a good hero against Zarya. That's usually a matchup that is favored for the Winston player. I think the Spark are just going to run a lot of Winston. That's usually what they did even when Winston started coming out of the meta. They still played Winston, and they found ways to win with Winston because I just think Gushui is that good on the hero. So I think this match has a lot of potential to just be a Winston mirror. I think both of these teams are good in that Winston matchup, and I think there's a possibility that's what we end up with as game number 1 between these two teams. I don't think we're going to see no Zarya from Atlanta. I think Atlanta will commit to some Zarya. Hangzhou might even commit to it. I mean, they have the potential to put a DPS player in as a tank and play Zarya if they really needed to. We've seen it, of course, with Decay in the past on Boston, or when he was on Washington. So it's possible that that's something they do, but I don't think they will. I think Gushui is too important to that team. I think he's going to stay and play. So I think Atlanta is the better team. I think you basically have one of two things happens. You have the Winston mirror, which to me, Atlanta as a whole is just a better team. When we saw in the midseason madness, they just kind of dominated. Yes, there's no more Sombra really to play, so that can hurt you a bit more, but I think that there's answers to Winston. And I think that if they do play Zarya, I feel better about Hawk on Zarya than I do about anyone on Hangzhou. So I think Atlanta should win. I think they're still the better team. I think Hangzhou comes into the playoffs pretty good. We get to see them on LAN finally this year, but I think right now Atlanta still feels like the better team, especially in the support line. I think that they should be able to walk away with this one. Boston versus London. These two teams played in the play-ins. Boston won pretty convincingly in that series. I think in a Zarya meta, they feel better. I think London will take a map, maybe even two, because you have map pick, and I think that's the benefit you have in a situation like this. You can pick a map and force teams onto maps that are more comfortable for the compositions you're good on. So like a rush-based map that London can push onto Boston. But I think Boston's still the better team. I think Boston is in a very good place with their lineup here. A Zarya meta is phenomenal for this team. I do think that when you have two really solid Zarya players in Smurf and in Kellen, or not in Kellen, in Kalios, it helps you quite a bit to be able to kind of play really, really, really well. And I think that helps quite a lot. So I think there is going to be a lot of things to watch for as we get into the matchups here, but I do think that it is a very interesting team with Boston. I think they just look better. I think they're a bit of a better roster, so I think they're going to take that one. That would set up, of course, the Hangzhou Spark versus London Spitfire in the lower bracket. I think this one's tough because, to me, neither of these teams want to play the meta. And I think ultimately the benefit that the Spark have in this series is that they've not had to play London before. And so London doesn't know what to expect from the way that the Spark play. But it's a double-edged sword because I think London's rush-based compositions are very, very tough to beat, and they're tough to break through. Now, to be fair, these teams played last year in the playoffs. Rosters were different, and the meta was different, but the Spark were able to win in that meta. I think it was a big Winston meta, so it was easier to kind of get away with it then. So this is a tough one. I want to say that the Spark are the better team, but what we saw from London in the play-ins really makes me think that they are probably in a much better position to win than Hangzhou is, because they play a style that, in theory, everybody knows how to stop it. Everybody can look at what London does and goes, yeah, they play rush. You got to run, your counters for your rush comps. You got to play stuff like Orisa. You got to be able to kind of slow them down. You got to be able to keep them away from you. But the way they play the sim TPs and all that type of stuff, it's a very hard comp to crack. They're very, very good with it, and I think it genuinely might be too much for the Spark because they have no experience against it. They have no history against it. They don't know what to expect with it. And I think that makes it hard to beat and to break through. So I'm going to say it's a 3-2 win for the Spitfire. I think there's a possibility that the Spark just completely dismantle this type of composition. We've seen how the Spark are really good against a team like Dallas, who don't necessarily play a similar style, but they play a lot of Junker Queen. They play a lot of Zarya, which are kind of rush-based heroes. And they're kind of rush-based comps, even if they're not Reinhardt specific. They're, like I said, they're different comps, they're different styles. But we have seen Hangzhou be very effective against Dallas, even with Winston on the side of the Spark. So I think there's a possibility this is going to be close, but it's a very tough ask, I think, to expect the Spark to be able to beat this Spitfire team convincingly. And I think the Spitfire, right now, I feel better about them. It's hard to gauge because we haven't seen these teams match up since last year in the playoffs. But right now, I think I favor the Spitfire just a little bit. Then in the upper bracket match here, Atlanta versus Boston, I think this is, in my opinion, Boston's best chance to beat Atlanta that they've had this year. I think if you look at the meta and you look at the strengths of these teams, to me, the tank matchup is very heavily in favor of Boston in this one. Smurf is a way better Zarya. Even Kalios is arguably a better Zarya than both Hawk. And I don't even know if Donghawk has a Zarya. Atlanta doesn't really have much in the terms of being able to put like a damage player on the hero or something like that. I think they're a much better kind of team unit. I think their coordination's been a lot better. But if Zarya is the meta, and everything points to her being the meta, I think Boston might actually be the better team in this matchup. And I think they have a very good chance at having this be the game they finally are able to beat the Reign. We've seen a lot of games where Boston fell flat against teams like Florida and Atlanta and Houston. Obviously, they have a win against Houston, but they've been unable to beat Atlanta this year. I think they've only played once this season, maybe twice. They played twice this season. So it's been very close. Boston has pushed Atlanta a lot. This, to me, is the time where I think finally Boston is able to swing the meta in their favor and win in that Zarya head-to-head. I think it's close, obviously. I think it's a 3-2. I don't even fully buy into this, but I think considering the meta, considering what we know about it, I think Boston can essentially play similar things so that if Atlanta wants to push and force stuff like Winston, Boston can do that as well. And they can also play the Zarya, so they can push Atlanta to maps that I think favor Boston more heavily. And that, to me, is really where the dynamic shifts and where I think Atlanta loses some of that edge that they've had so far this season. But I think it's close. I think it's very, very close. Either way, this match, to me, is like a 50-50 toss-up. But I do really rate Boston higher right now in terms of the tank meta. So there you go. Atlanta versus London. I think Atlanta's the better team, definitively. I think they know what to expect. They've dealt with London in the past. They've played London before. I don't think they're that worried about it. I think they take down the London Spitfire and advance to the grand finals, the top four for Sunday, which is going to be wild that all four of those, or all four of the final games are on the last day. That's kind of wild. So let's move now down to the lower side of this bracket, the secondary bracket, the East winners bracket. On this side of the Dallas Fuel, the Seoul Infernal, Houston Outlaws, and Florida Mayhem. This, to me, is the bracket of death. This is the much tougher bracket because we're going to a Zarya meta, and you have someone who statistically has one of the best Zaryas in the league. Would not have expected that, but he is first in final blows per 10, first in eliminations per 10, second in hero damage per 10, third in solo kills per 10, tied with Hanbin. So you have a really good Zarya player in someone. Also, Hanbin is in this bracket, who's third in final blows per 10, fourth in eliminations per 10, first in hero damage per 10, and like I said, tied with someone in solo kills per 10, tied at third. That is all time. Plus you have Bernard, who just recently joined Houston, who is pretty good statistically. He's not as good as the others are, but he certainly is, he has got similar stats to Smurf in terms of like eliminations per 10. He's lower on the final blows per 10. He's in the he's a little lower than Kalios on that one, but still a solid player, kind of among some of the other kind of good Zarya players that you would expect. And this is over the past couple of years. It's not the entirety of the league, but it's, since like 2021, I believe. But solo kills per 10, he is up there he's just behind Hanbin and someone. And then you have Soul Infernal with Mag, who is not a Zarya player. He does not have Zarya on his under his belt. So I think in this bracket, the Soul Infernal are definitively the weakest team. I think that in this meta, this side of the bracket in particular, you look at the teams that are here, this is the bracket where you have to play Zarya. The top side of this bracket is not a super strong Zarya bracket in terms of the teams that are here. Like I said, Spark, Reign, Spitfire, even the Uprising. I don't think their strengths are Zarya, but I think the Uprising can excel in Zarya. Down here, you're playing against Zarya with Hanbin, Zarya with someone, Zarya with Bernard. So to me, you have to be able to play Zarya. And yes, Winston is good against Zarya, but if Zarya is hard meta, it can be a little more difficult. So in this round one matchup between Dallas and the Seoul Infernal, last time these two teams played, it was a Dallas Fuel victorious. I think a lot of people have written off the Dallas Fuel a little bit because of the losses they suffered at the hands of the Hangzhou Spark in the summer stage. They lost to the Spark 3 times in the summer stage. I think a lot of people kind of felt like that was a pretty bad sign for them. But that's the only team they lost to. It just stinks for them that they played them 3 times. To me, Dallas right now is a better team than the Soul Infernal. They're playing better. The meta is way more in their favor. They have arguably the best Zarya in the league. He's statistically among the best, and I think when you look at his impact as a whole across the league, I think he has been arguably the best Zarya in the league. I do not want to play the Dallas Fuel if I am any of the teams in the league right now. I think they are in a very good position by having to play Zarya. The fact that they were one of the first teams that were kind of thrown to the other side of the bracket, actually, I think they were one of the last ones, which is shocking because I think in a Zarya meta they should actually be pretty good. Now that I'm looking at the list, that's actually quite shocking that would happen. But yeah, I think the Fuel are going to be really good in the Zarya meta. I think they just have phenomenal coaching, a phenomenal Zarya player, and I think their DPS are good enough to get the job done, especially if it's a Genji meta and you have Sparkle. That's pretty good. And I think Bliss and MCD really came into their own late in the season. As the season progressed, they got very, very good as a duo. I think they are a really good team. So I think Fuel, honestly, clean the house of the Infernal. I think the Infernal are going to struggle a lot in this meta. I don't think they're going to look great in the playoffs. And I think Fuel will take that one. That sets up Outlaws Mayhem. I think it's going to be a 5-map banger off the bat. So I'm just going to set it to 2-2 for now as we discuss it. I think if you look at the big problem that I think the Houston Outlaws are going to run into is the fact that it's a Zarya meta and they're not going to play Fearless. The fact that they signed Bernard tells you everything you need to know. Zarya is really, really good, and they needed someone who could play Zarya at a high level. And Bernard is the guy who can do that. I love Bernard. I am a huge fan of Bernard. I think Bernard is a phenomenal player. I think he is an underrated off-tank player who had genuinely one of the best runs in the Overwatch League as an off-tank. On London, on Hangzhou, on both of those teams, he was very, 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 very good. So I think he's a good addition to this team. The problem is he is joining this team very late. He doesn't have the pre-existing synergy with the rest of the team that you have on Florida Mayhem with someone who is also a phenomenal Zarya, who statistically is one of the best Zaryas that we've seen in the Overwatch League. So you are going to have the massive amounts of talent on the side of the Houston Outlaws that I think you need to be able to overcome some of the shortcomings of having someone joining the roster late. But you don't have the synergy that we've seen from the Florida Mayhem, which I think is the most synergized and best kind of unit of a roster in the league right now. And when you just look at how good someone is on the Zarya, I think the fact that we're seeing a new kind of player and piece brought into Houston Outlaws, to me, is a bit more of a concern than it is anything else. I think the Outlaws are going to fall a little bit flat in this match, and the Mayhem walk away from that one victorious. That would set up the Soul Inferno versus Houston Outlaws in the lower bracket. I think the Outlaws will completely roll the Infernal. Like I said, I think the Infernal are the weakest team in the playoffs. I think that right now, the way the meta is, the way the bracket ended up for them, they got super unlucky. If I'm honest with you, if I'm the Hangzhou Spark, I'm kind of happy I'm not the number 1 seed with the way that the bracket ended up. Because if I'm the Spark, I'm glad I'm not on a bracket with Dallas and Houston and Florida. Even if they've been good against Florida. Houston and Florida, you know, it's tough. So I think Houston is the better team than the Inferno. I think the Inferno are just not going to look great in the playoffs. I really don't buy into what they've done in the second half of the year. They barely, they almost didn't qualify for the playoffs automatically. They lost to the Dynasty and O2 Blast in the summer knockouts. I don't think the Infernal I just don't think they're playing super well, and I definitely think the meta is not in their favor. So I think they are going to be the most disappointing team in the playoffs. I think they're going to have the worst performance of any team. I just don't buy them where they are right now. I think they just don't look great, and I think they're gonna bounce out. So that sets up Dallas versus Florida in the upper bracket, of course. This is a tough one. I think part of the intrigue, I think, behind teams like Dallas and London being in the playoffs is that we don't necessarily know what to expect from those two teams. We haven't seen them play on international stages, right? Dallas didn't make the Mid-Season Madness. London didn't make the Mid-Season Madness. But they're both now in the playoffs, and they both kind of create this kind of X factor that we don't necessarily know what to expect. To me, Dallas is a team that in the second half of the year has been one of the best in the league. And I think the only thing that really has hurt them so far was the fact that they just don't match up well against the Spark for whatever reason. But the meta to me, as we're going into this Zarya meta, is really good for them. I think the Mayhem, honestly, might be the best team right now in the world. And I don't think going to a Zarya meta hurts them nearly as much as a team like Atlanta, who I think have looked very good this year. I think that it's not a good hero for the Atlanta Reign. I think it's a very good hero for someone. I think it's a very good hero for the Florida Mayhem. So I think this one should be decently close, but I think the Mayhem will take it. I'm going to say at 3-2. I think Hanbin is such a dominant player on that role. He is so good on Zarya that I do think, very realistically, the Florida Mayhem will have a bit of a tough time dealing with Hanbin. But I think the Mayhem are just the better team. They have looked better. They have not lost a game since the Midseason Madness. They're on a tear in the league right now. And I think that you have to feel like they right now are in pole position to take the Overwatch League because they just look really, really good right now. That sets up Dallas versus Houston, a battle for Texas here for the final spot in the grand finals, the top 4. This, to me, is very tough. Obviously, I've not picked an Eastern region team yet, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to question that or think about that or make note of that. To me, this is the only chance of any Eastern region team getting out is with Dallas. Dallas, to me, is the only team from the East that has any shot because the meta is so good for them, and they have the best Zarya player in the world, in my opinion. But Houston is very, very good, and their roster is phenomenal. They have such talented pieces all around them that I think Bernard, yes, he's a new addition to this roster. Yes, he hasn't had the full amount of time that you would want. I don't think he's played with anybody on this Outlaws roster before. I could be wrong. At least he hasn't played with them in the Overwatch League. Maybe in Contenders, I don't know exactly. But I don't think he's played with anybody on this roster before on a team environment. But I think the roster is so good around him that I think this team is going to be very, very good as well. So I think this is a very tough one to call. I think it's probably going to be close. It's a battle for Texas. I want it to be close because Battle for Texas, one of the best rivalries in the history of the Overwatch League. But I look and I just think about where these teams have been so far this year. And as good as Dallas is, it's hard for me to imagine a world in which the Violet Shoe and Pelican Happy lines, don't make it to the top 4. Like, they are so good that I think it's almost absurd to imagine them not making it. But I will say that I think of the top 4 teams from the Midseason Madness, Houston might be in the most vulnerable position. I think there's a very real chance they're better in this meta than Atlanta is. I think Atlanta just has an easier bracket. But to me, Houston, the fact that they have Florida and Dallas, one of Houston, Florida, and Dallas is guaranteed not to make top 4. And there's a very real argument to be made that all 3 of them are actually in the top 4 of this meta. But only one of them, or only 2 of them can make it. One of them has to miss. I think Houston's a better team. I think they've looked better as a whole this year. I think it's very close. I think coaching is probably better on the side of Dallas. I think they have the better Zarya player. So if Zarya is the meta, which we think it's going to be, I think they're in a better position. But I think Houston has looked better as a team. And I think in a matchup like this one, when you have clear holes in your roster and your lineup, I think Houston will do everything they can to try to force away from Zarya, to get Fearless into games, to put Fearless into positions to succeed, and force the fuel off of Zarya maps. I think Houston has a little bit more ability to do that right now, which I think will ultimately work in their favor. But here we go now to the top 4. I honestly didn't necessarily think this was going to be my bracket. I didn't think it was going to be Boston, Houston, Florida, Atlanta. I definitely did not think necessarily that Boston would be my team winning that first game. But here we go. So Boston versus Houston would be the first game there. Houston's the only team in the top 4 that Boston has beaten. Boston's come close in some other games, especially against Florida. But I think meta-wise, actually, this might be Boston's best chance. I actually think this is the perfect playoff meta for Boston because I think it actually it plays into their strengths as a pretty flexible roster more than it does some of the other teams like Atlanta, like Houston. Whereas I think Boston's best comp is probably Winston-based compositions. I think that's Smurf's best hero. But it's also the best looks for Houston, the best looks for Atlanta, that I think being able to move off of that and still be very good, I think actually helps Boston quite a bit. So I think in this matchup in particular, Boston might actually be the better team. I don't know why I'm so high on Boston right now. I don't know why I'm drinking so much Boston Kool-Aid, but I think they're playing very well. And I think if you look at their team, you look at their history on a lot of the heroes that are good right now, I think they're in a better spot. So I actually think Boston has a very real shot at taking the series. I think Houston is just not in a comfortable position. And if Boston is able to do what I think they are, sorry about that. If Boston's able to do what I think they are and get in through the first day, right? They're in by Friday. They don't even play Saturday. That's more time to rest, more time to watch up, more time to kind of be prepared. I actually think in a Boston versus Houston matchup, last time they played, it was Boston that got the edge pretty convincingly. Houston has not looked as, they've looked a lot better since then. But I actually think Boston might be the better team in this meta, in this matchup. And I think it depends on who they play, obviously, determines if they get in. But I think right now, Boston, yeah, I think they look very, very good. And I have them right now better than the Outlaws. So there we go. That puts them in the grand finals. But who will their opponent be? Will it be Florida? Will it be Atlanta? I think it's pretty clear based on what I've talked about where I rate most of the teams right now. I think Florida is right now the best team. They beat Atlanta last time they played. I think they're the better Zarya team. I think the meta is better for them. They have not lost a game since the midseason madness. So, yeah, as good as Atlanta's been all year, I think Florida takes this one. I'll say a 3-2 because I think, once again, when you can force map picks, you can move your team on certain maps, you can find ways that you can win. But I don't love Atlanta in this meta. I genuinely do not think this is a great meta for them. I think they're going to find more struggle in this meta than otherwise they might. And so to me, Atlanta is just not the juggernaut in this meta they've been. And I think that the Mayhem right now look to be so good that I think the Mayhem are the team ultimately that walk away with this one. Now, the Pickems don't have the third place match, which will, in this case, be between Houston and the Atlanta Reign. So I'll just throw out that in the third place game, I think Atlanta probably takes it. It's close. I think in terms of Zarya, you feel better about Houston, but I think Atlanta, you feel a little bit better about them as a team. I think Houston's been up and down. I think adding in Bernard provides some level of complication to this team that I think will make it more difficult for them to actually win. But I think it's probably like a 3-2 for Atlanta in the third place game against Houston. It's also one of those things like how much the team's going to care in a third place game, like how much energy you're going to have. Like Bernard might be the most motivated because he hasn't been on the team yet, so he wants to prove himself again, but I don't really know. But I'll say Atlanta over Houston for that one. Then the grand finals, Boston versus Florida. Absolutely, genuinely, when I got into doing this bracket, was not expecting this. Did not think this was going to be my grand finals. I think Florida's going to make it. I think that 100% is in the cards. I think Florida right now looks like the best team in the league. I think between Boston and Atlanta, one of those teams is going to win that group. I think either one of them really could do it. I think both of them are in a really good spot. I think, Florida to me feels like the team that should be favored to make it. Any of the other three, depending on what the bracket ends up being, depending on the draw that you end up getting, who wins what bracket and whatnot, determines who makes it. I think just Boston, in this case, in this scenario, the way I have it, got lucky, right? And they got the luck of the draw to get into the bracket to play against Florida. And they have struggled to try to beat Florida recently. The first time they played in the midseason madness, it was a stomp in favor of Florida. The next two times, it was a 3-2 and a 3-2 that Florida is able to win. So Boston is clawing. They have been clawing at the Mayhem now for several metas. I think as long as they can get away with not having to play really hard flex DPS, like they just don't have a May player. Like they have struggled on May this year. It's been one of their worst picks. If they don't have to play that, I think they'll be fine. I don't love Decay on Genji. I think he's an okay Genji. He can get you wins against some good teams, against like most of the league. But I think if Genji is the meta, which considering the fact that we see Florida literally adding Who Are You to their roster, there's a very real possibility that Genji is the meta. And also it might just be that they added it because they were like, yeah, that's the best option for us, is to bring in the Who Are You Genji just in case, just to be safe. So I don't know what to expect fully from every aspect of the meta, which is what makes doing a bracket like this quite difficult with the changes. But I think I have to go with Florida. I think Florida's going to win it. I'm going to say it's a close one just because I want it to be close. I'm going to say it's a 4-2 for Florida. Now I'll go 4-3. It's been very close last time they've played. I think that's what we're going to get. It's going to be a 4-3 Florida Mayhem over the Boston Uprising in the grand finals, and that is going to be it. That is going to be the end of the Overwatch League season and potentially the final match of the Overwatch League. Lots of interesting things going on. It'll be fun to watch. I think it'll be an interesting format. I don't love it. I have problems with it just like everybody else does, but I think there's a lot of really interesting things going on with this one. There's a lot of interesting matchups potentially, and so I'm just excited to see where it goes as we head into the end of this season. So let me know your thoughts on my bracket in the comments down below. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? I think a lot of people are not going to have Boston in their grand finals, but hey, maybe it'll happen. I don't know. Yeah, there you go. That's my list. Let me know, like I said, in the comments down below your thoughts on it. Thank you all for the support throughout the season, throughout the year. It's been great. It's been wonderful. It's meant a lot that you guys have been supporting and loving content and commenting and all that type of stuff. It's great. I love it. Hopefully, this is not the end of the channel. Hopefully, there is still more to come as we go into the future of Overwatch esports beyond the Overwatch League. But from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much. Obviously, there's still more content to come. We have to talk about what happened next week. And we also are going to have to look at and talk about the World Cup and all that type of stuff. So there's still stuff to talk about. But the Overwatch League seemingly coming to an end. This has been such a ride, such a journey. It's been a great time. And so, yeah, thank you all so much. But that's going to be it for today. Thank you all once again. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.